benefits. This is the things that I like the most about the Association for Media Literacy, because we try to inform ourselves about more than just the parent and the teacher point of view. We need to know from the people who are working in the industry. And that's what we have here. So, Ted, I'm going to start with you. And I'm going to start with Ted because that's going to give other people something to remark upon. So it's not that they're not going to be talking about their own situations. So certainly Kathryn is going to talk about Mozilla, and I'm a great admirer of Mozilla, which is why she's on the panel. But she is going to talk about Mozilla, but she's also going to talk a little bit about TED. So Ted, you are actually learning how to be, I'm not sure, should I say Snoop Spy, Spook,
White Hat Hacker?
White Hat Hacker, so far.
Yeah.
Right, and that hat color may be adjustable, you know, let's see. Okay, I've asked Ted to start because I think it's really useful for us to know what kinds of things are possible, what people are learning. And I'd like you, if you're a teacher, to realize that what Ted is doing could be part of your students' future. And I keep saying this to people, we have to realize that anytime we go off and condemn something, we might be cutting off a career option. And that's not fair to students. I could badmouth McDonald's for all kinds of reasons, and I have a student sitting in my class whose parents work at McDonald's. And that's the kind of thing I have to keep in mind. So, Ted, can you take us through white hat stuff?
White Hat stuff. I'll look as close toward
Yes.
So, I'm actually studying computer security and investigations. That's the official title of the course. Now, I was born here in Toronto, but I was fortunate enough to have a lot of experience working with computers. So when I was looking towards post-secondary education, I was Googling around. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I looked into what they call penetration testing or ethical hacking. And the first thing that came up was this course offered at Computer Bureau, which was CSI, or Computer Security and Investigations. And it just stood out, so I went and took a shot in the dark, and everything that they offered and said that they would offer just spiked my interest. So I went and took a shot in the dark, moved out there, and now I'm a second-year student. So the kinds of things that are taught in this course are, everything from things just like cyber trends. We study cyber law, criminology, simple networking stuff, and then more advanced things like internet investigations, computer network security. We do a lot of policy kind of stuff, or like emergency management and operational security. So developing security policies for companies. So that's the gist of the course that I'm studying.
What might you be able to find out about me if you had a little personal information?
Well, given your name, I could probably find out your address. Easy, simple Google search. Maybe even using Yellow Pages or White Pages, whatever will lead me to the most amount of information. And then from there, it's what I choose to do with that information. If I am able to even just find a phone number, I can social engineer you, and that's something that we learn about. And social engineering is described as the hacking of the human. So if I were to call, let's say, your house and you were home, but somebody you live with was there, I could just be impersonate somebody trying to confirm your address. And with that phone number, and now that I have your address, I have a great deal of information that I can use in other ways to find out even more information. So it's really like how you choose to use any information that's made public on the internet to, do that investigation.
What might you do if you have my IP address?
Well, that you can do many things. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to do, right? I read through Ron's book, or just flipped through it anyway, and I saw that he actually talks about some of the tools that we are learning about, such as Nmap, which just allowed me to run a simple port scan on your network. If I see, that you have some ports open on your network, then I do some poking around. I can, see what kind of information I can get. See if I can track some of the emails that you've sent through IPs, looking through where IP tables, that kind of thing. But it's really, what I choose to do with it.
I actually have a question. I think there's a range of experience in the room. What, like white hat hacking was mentioned. What is meant by that?
So,
how do you connect with that?
So, when you think of hackers, you think of people who stealing information, people that use technology in malicious ways to put, detriment on people. So, although you can do bad with hacking, you can also do good. And the point of white hat hacking is to secure and reinforce the security holes. So you are essentially, poking around, seeing where those holes are, and once you find those holes, you're able to fix those holes. So you won't be able to fix those holes until you find them.
It's white hat hacking is opposed to black hat hacking.
Yeah,
should
correct.
explain, which is the bad guys, and the middle ground as well, the gray hat hackers who could go both ways. And of course, I understand the term hacking. This terminology comes from the Wild West, because the bad guy, the bad robber cowboy, wore black hats, and this was adopted by the hacker set.
So you might get a job with a company that wants you to find its vulnerabilities and close them.
Correct.
Or you could actually go to work for Ron Deaver.
It's true.
And you'd still be white hat.
Yep.
Or so says Ron Deaver. Except it's curious that he's employing all those hacking strategies. If you read his book, he's sitting at a computer watching the Chinese snoop on the Indians. And you think for just a moment, okay, so he's sitting in Canada having hacked into the Chinese computers, and he's watching them as they hacked into the Indian computers. And there's a certain glass onion element here where you've got layers and layers. But that's really interesting. I wish you all success. And as I said earlier, teachers, you can actually suggest to your students that this is a viable career path. I hope Ted will have a long and successful career, and I see no reason why he wouldn't, given the fact that these vulnerabilities, Ron Deaver actually talks about the vulnerabilities and how rapidly they appear, and that kind of thing, and it's just an unending stream. So lots and lots of work. Thank you. I think it might be interesting also to hear from somebody who's got a career in privacy. So Mick, I'm going to ask you to speak for a while, please. Mick has his own company now, but he has a history with Visa, and I think he's going to be able to tell us some very interesting things. Can you get nice and close to the mic, please?
Is that close enough? Thanks, Neil. Actually, I have an extensive background not only with Visa, but all of the major credit card brands, and a major bank here in Canada as well. So just very quickly, 13-year veteran in payment industries, and now have my own anti-fraud security company protecting consumers in online shopping. So that's my quick blow. So just want to pick up from what Ted was leading down as well. When Neil asked, well, if you got my name, what could you do? Well, there's so much more that a hacker can do. So in the example that Neil gave, which is we could call up the address and confirm the address. Well, there's various types of attacks in the marketplace. So I'm sure some of you have heard of the term phishing, or a phishing website, where a website looks spoof, or it may appear to be genuine, but it's in fact a spoof website. There's different attacks called phishing with a V. So in this instance, Neil may in fact receive a phone call, and the person on the other line may appear to be the bank. So let's just choose RBC as a bank. So in this instance, the fraudster or the hacker will go on to say that I'm calling on behalf of RBC. Excuse me. We have your name. We want to confirm your address. We also have a credit card on file. Can you just please confirm the digits? And unknowingly, because we seemingly trust the fact that this is RBC calling, we will naturally go ahead and give our credit card information over to the crook. So upon that, crooks put the phone down. Now they have a lot of information. Within that, not to alarm you too much, now I have Neil's name, address, and a credit card. Now I can take that with another set of information, and I can go and apply for a line of credit against Neil's credentials, unknown to him. And of course, he'll find out several months later when the bank to where the line of credit or whatever the lending is being applied for doesn't get their payment, and then they'll call up Neil, or the credit bureau will call up Neil, and Neil will say, "What are you talking about? That wasn't me." So there becomes a real problem. So when we think of hacking, just to pick up from the point earlier, we've got the white hackers and we've got the black hackers. And so very clearly, as the gentleman in the front said, that black hat hackers are the ones who do the damage, who do a lot of no good stuff. And then within that, you've got two segments, if you will. You've got ones that are truly malicious and evil and go out and help to create a lot of havoc. Excuse me. And then you've got those who can just break in to prove that they've broken in, and they get a real kick out of this. And then, as Ted mentioned, you've got the white hat hackers who are actually employed by the IBMs or the Microsofts of the world to actually find the flaws or the gaps to try and fix or patch up. In terms of where we are today, I think it's fair to say, and I'd be interested to see what the panel has in terms of their opinion. But the reality is, you don't get any grade or skill set or predefined skill set of a hacker. If a hacker wants to go in and break into a network, please understand that they will. We've seen over the last several months, notably with Target, Home Depot, most recently, you may have heard, JP Morgan Chase, a very established institution in the US, who, like any other bank, have conformed to the highest standards of security, socket layers, and security protocols. They've been breached. And they had 83 million accounts compromised over the last several weeks. 83 million, that's pretty substantial. Now, even though credit card information wasn't stolen or direct account information wasn't stolen, the fact that hackers got into a secure network in itself is alarming. So we've got the banks, and then we've got, excuse me, we've got social media platforms such as Snapchat. I'm sure some of you have heard over the last several weeks, Snapchat got compromised. With hundreds of thousands of private, personal, in fact, even some inappropriate photos have been compromised. But when you take a look at Snapchat, when Snapchat first came out in the market, their value proposition is that we capture the information, we store it for a few seconds, and we delete it. Well, clearly, there's a problem because it wasn't deleted, and now we've got these young adolescents, and I think this is perhaps a connection that we can draw to this discussion with this event. We've got young adolescents who have unknowingly taken pictures of themselves in various compromising positions or environments, and now it's at risk. And we saw that several months before that, or a month or so before that, with iCloud. And so the list goes on. I think what I'm trying to impress upon everyone here is that understand that when we use a digital highway, you have to be very careful how to navigate around that. Because wherever you are, however you enter that arena, you are going to leave a footprint. And that footprint will possibly leave you exposed immediately or later down the line, but no one is immune. And we've seen that over the last several months.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Khash, you're not expressly in the computer security business, but I'm guessing that you have a number of security challenges as a regular part of your business. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that and your perspective on some of what we've heard.
Actually, one of the things we do is bridge the gap between, the ethical hacking and pen testers, as well as the PCI legislation that they need to adhere to. So I do have a good question for you.
A little closer to the mic, please.
Are you learning anything about applications to level security? Specifically for like iPhones, are they teaching any of that?
Not at the moment, but I do know that later on we will be using forensic toolkits to try and analyze things like cell phones.
Because one of the things that we're seeing is the amount of data that is collected on these phones is ridiculous. Facebook gathers every page that you've been on while not in the Facebook app itself. So if they can do that, they could pretty easily get to my credit card information because they do online banking. And this becomes a concern for my customers because my customers want to be able to accept credit cards on behalf of their customers through their phones. So I'm wondering, is this going to be like a big area in the future? I mean, are you...
Well, no, certainly.
Sorry, to the microphone, please.
I just don't think I fully understand your question.
Well, so I'm assuming that you're familiar with like Kali and OpenVAS and stuff like that. They're meant to attack hardened servers or networks. But what about actually at the application level for a phone? Is that?
I can see that being useful. I don't know if that's in the curriculum. There isn't like a course on cellular devices. But I mean, as the technology develops, I mean, I know iPhone's just made the statement about their default encryption, so to prevent these kinds of government and private sector businesses just analyzing their data because that's not what they want. But if you're saying on the application level, as a security thing, when you choose to install an app like Facebook, you are knowingly creating that risk of them having access to the data. So, I mean,
everyone loves free. We love to give that stuff away. But so it's very interesting because I would have thought that with all these devices, there would actually be at least some kind of, at the educational level pointing out that maybe we should start looking at these as an attack vector.
Absolutely.
Can I just want to jump in real quick? I think it's timely for me to underline some of the points that have already been brought up. So one is I'm glad you mentioned social engineering as a piece of that, because many people have the idea that it's the technology and we focus very much, and it's very easy to focus on the technology, but that can be very easily circumvented by social engineering. So you can have the craziest encryption in the world, and if the encryption password is on a post-it note, it doesn't matter.
So could we define social engineering so people are comfortable with what we're talking about?
Who's talking to them? Just some clarity in terms of their background.
Oh, I'm sorry. Certainly. Just before Khash was speaking, and Khash is running his own business, and Khash is very kindly hosting the Association for Media Literacy website. We're very grateful for that. But Khash runs his own business and serves a number of customers and works with their websites to keep them secure and functioning. So he's one of these people who has all the servers that are hosting all the websites and keeping the traffic going and that kind of thing. And is conceivably maybe somebody who Ted would work for at some future time. Mark, who just said he wanted to clarify, Mark is working for the Privacy Commission of Ontario, if I got that right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Privacy Commission of Ontario. And Mark is here, therefore, as a knowledgeable privacy person, but also somebody working on my behalf. And so I'm grateful for that. Does that make you feel more comfortable now? Okay. Mark.
So, okay, well, two things. One, you asked about, I guess, a definition, which I think we kind of touched upon. So the social engineering piece is the human element. So the technical element might come down to system design, ones and zeros. If you're at a bank machine and someone can very clearly see over your shoulder, that's a social element. That has to do with humans and a non-tech. That's physical design. So I think I don't know if that sort of clarifies, if that defines it very deeply. But I think the social element is important, and many people would think that and I don't have the stats on it in front of me, but many people might think that more breaches occurred because of technology. But I think, again, if I had the stats, it would be a little better. But I think you would be surprised how many of the breaches occurred because of the social element, because of the human element. That's not to downplay the importance of the technical piece. The security needs to be important, which segues into the other piece I wanted to underline that Ted brought up, which is the default. So our office, for years, has been pushing to emphasize the default, because I'm sure everybody here, when they get a new device, or when they're installing something on a computer, tends to click next, 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 yay, it's installed. And they go with whatever the default is. So if you get a new iPhone, I'd love to know, people had the numbers on what the percentage of people are who actually read the privacy policies, or who read, or who set things, based on their own preferences. Usually, and the companies make this on purpose, easy to turn on and to use, so it's one step. You turn it on, and yay, it works. However, you've also engaged in, now I've got geo tracking on. Now I've got, facial recognition turned on by default, because users will typically use whatever the default is. So it's important for folks like Ted, engineers, to make the default privacy protected. And in some cases, that's a good thing. And for a lot of these companies like Facebook and Google, it's not. Because you have to ask yourself, would Facebook have such a proliferation? Would you share as easily if it wasn't accidental? So if the default is sharing with the public, then this person shared with everybody, so everybody gets to see it. Your product's not going to grow as quickly or as well if you have, I'm only sharing with Ted. So maybe, because I know our organization's met with some very interesting and amazing privacy protective alternative companies. And it's interesting that they don't spread it as much as, like, let's say, Facebook. So there is a value to those organizations to have the privacy set really low so that it spreads. But the danger, the unintended consequences are something that they let you figure out later. So oops, you shared that with everybody. That was your vacation bikini pic that shouldn't have been everywhere. And it is. So anyways, I don't want to go too far down my sort of talk, but I think in addition to that perspective, I also want to emphasize that I'm not saying shut down all of your social media and never use technology again. That's actually the opposite of the point I want to make. But I think those two elements, I just wanted to underline. The social engineering piece is super important, and the making privacy the default is critical for a lot of things.
And I rush to mention that what you're just describing is media literacy.
Precisely.
Because
it couldn't be more fitting.
Because it is the social engineering part.
Yeah, it's about how you navigate within, and not all or nothing. So either shut it all down or share everything. It's about being literate with the tools that you're using.
On the other hand, Khash mentioned something that was passed by way too quickly, and that is that Facebook is tracking not just our Facebook actions, but all of our actions on all of our other websites. And they're even able to do that if we sign out of Facebook, because it's already been installed and it's working quite happily just the way they want it to. So that's something else that we need to be aware of, and I don't know that there's a default to get around that. I think probably what we have to do is revolt against Facebook and demand that it be changed. Mick?
Yeah, I just want to actually pick up from what Mark was sharing in reference to citing some of Ted's experiences. I think the reality is this: as much as we educate students at a higher education level of all of the privacy issues, concerns, truth is, when someone like Facebook hires a student like Ted and gives him an $80,000 to $120,000 check a year, they're going to respectfully, and I would do the same probably, but they would very respectfully follow the guidelines and the objectives set up by the business, because at the end of the day, it's all about making money. Business is a business. What I think we need to understand is that as much as this is a real problem, it needs to come from a higher level, not so much of the awareness of educating students to then go and work in those organizations, but at a regulatory body. So someone like an Ontario Commissioner's Office coming down really hard on a Facebook or a Google is the first step. The other thing is that when we talk about privacy, there's really a collection of data that's happening at a massive scale. When I think about privacy, I also think about security as well. Privacy for me would be more of a regulatory issue. Security would be more of a breach. So as we start farming all this data in, what happens with that information? One of the things that we saw quite commonly a few years ago, and I'm just going to pick on Facebook just because it's quite the thing this morning, is whenever we used to go to a place and we would check in, because we want to be so popular about checking in here, checking in there. It was unknown to a lot of people that actually hackers were out there collecting that data. And then they would follow where you would be going to, whether you're away from home, because, of course, when you create your account, you create an account with your home information, and then you say publicly that I'm away at a hotel, or away at a resort, or away on vacation, so now your house is empty. And so, thieves are actually breaking in, and everyone's trying to figure out how did this happen. We also saw a trend, actually, which is really clever. And I want to, once again, as I said earlier, impress upon you that hackers and fraudsters will go to every length to make you a victim. Not to scare you, but the truth is that they have no limits. We saw several instances in the financial industry where cardholders were called up at hotels because hackers or fraudsters found out that they checked in at a hotel in a remote location away from home, that they would call up and pretend to be the front desk. So they would say, Mr. Bhinder, we just were calling up from the front desk. There was an issue with your credit card. Could we just please confirm the information that you provided us? So unknowingly, I would then talk to the higher front desk and relay everything over. Meanwhile, then the hacker, who got patched to my room, has now walked off with my information. So I guess what I'm really trying to share with you is that we enjoy social media, social engineering. We can benefit from it in so many ways. I think Google and every other service out there can offer valuable service, and I certainly enjoy some of the features that my phone allows me to use when I check into a place. But what do we do with that information? How is it protected? Who is the victim? Who should be monitoring it? Who should be regulating it? There's a really a higher calling for a higher cause to be had here. I'm not sure if anyone else has an opinion.
I'd just like to ask Kathryn, who's been sitting very, very politely, if it's possible to have a company that's ethical and successful at the same time.
So I was actually just thinking as I was listening, we all clearly want to know more about this. I see some hands already, it means there's questions, people in the audience are thinking, you're here on a Saturday morning. There's a lot to learn about, and it's always changing. And where I come at it from, I'm the director of Hive Toronto at Mozilla, is the idea of how do we teach this to youth, and how do we teach this to educators and those that work with youth, so they can go beyond the overshare on Facebook and start thinking about privacy and security from a level of harm reduction and protection that we are all thinking on, because we're using all the same things youth are using, and they're probably using it more than us. So how do we move beyond don't share that naked photo of you on Snapchat to talking about these issues? So I come from, when people hear Mozilla, they usually think Firefox, our products, or maybe even Firefox phones. And we do have add-ons and specific aspects in those products that really do help to combat and deal with some of these issues. But Mozilla also, as a nonprofit, we have a big focus on teaching and learning. And Hive is the aspect of youth learning, and Hive Toronto is a focus on Toronto. And so we're actually working on a project with the University of Toronto right now. My colleague on that project, Leslie Shade, is here today, and it's actually funded by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, so the federal version of where Mark is. And this project is really identifying these kind of things need to be taught to youth in a way that is not sucky and not boring. We need to go beyond what we're doing now if we're going to educate ourselves and then also educate youth. So we're working on a project, actually it's happening right now, a series of 8 workshops, I think around a second. They're at U of T today, going back and forth between the Mozilla offices and U of T. And it's really focusing on co-designing privacy education, designing privacy education resources that we can make available for free to everyone else. Most likely educators will find it the most useful. And co-designing open digital badges that can then verify the learning that's happened through those resources. So that's where I'm coming at this issue from, is how do we get this to youth and educators? Because we're all here, a lot of us are educators because we want to learn about this. And so that's what our project is focusing on. And actually, I'm going to probably ask some of the people on this panel afterwards to come and speak to the youth, because we don't value the fact that youth are already engaging in these issues and thinking about privacy in this way. At our first workshop, we did an exercise mapping what do you know about privacy and security, what are you thinking about it. I don't think it's fair to assume that all youth are on the same page. Not all youth are digital natives. They have a lot of blockers to that kind of access. Some of them are on different ends of the digital divide spectrum. So in this activity, yes, there were the things of don't share that photo of you, managing your online reputation, things that we know youth are thinking about. We already have resources that help them think about that. Media literacy in schools is definitely touching on that. But then they were also starting to raise, talking about SOPA and PIPEDA, about Edward Snowden, NSA, big data, and these are 14 to 19-year-olds. So our role right now with this project is to figure out how do we help them learn more. So they are knowing as much as the people, getting to the point where they're learning about the issues that people on this panel are talking about.
I know there's a lot of questions. Can I just, I think there's been some good points that have been made, and I thought it would be good to, at least in my opinion, to clarify the difference. So we talked about hacking and we talked about privacy settings. And I think, so in the case of the example that Mick gave, you could say on Facebook, I'm going to the Bahamas for the next 2 weeks and get robbed while you're gone. That is not necessarily getting hacked if you've publicly said that. So a hack is really deceptive, going in, sneaking in, using a password. If the end user doesn't take advantage of Facebook's privacy settings that they have implemented, then I'm not blaming the victim. And that's another actually important point, is even with the Snapchat case, it's very easy for us to say no one should share any pictures, no one should do whatever, because it could be on the cover of the newspaper tomorrow. And that's true. But it's never that person's fault, I believe. I think at the end of the day, the hacker that's going in and doing something illegal is the one that's at fault. It would be the same as going to the bank, and the bank gets robbed, and you say, well, you put your money in there. It's your fault because you put your money there. So, but that's nuanced, right? I don't want to make it a black and white issue, because there are nuances with deception or like in the case of the Snapchat one's great because what they led you to believe wasn't actually the case. And the same thing happened years ago with Facebook when you delete photos that aren't actually deleted. And the same thing would go for like another deceptive kind of thing would be taking your information that you think you're using for some purpose, and then using it for selling it to a third-party marketer or whatever it is. So I think really, I guess the point that I'm painting is, one is the difference between hacking, like legitimate hacking, and people misusing the software. So we can say to Facebook all you want, hey, put in, the privacy commissioner might come out and say, put in these privacy settings. They will implement them, and then people may not use them. So I think this goes back to being literate with whatever technology you're using, is understand what's there. And then the other thing is the onus should be on the company a little bit to make that easy to use and easy to understand. And that's where I think you see the trend is going now. And I think as people have more scenarios where they get caught, like even in the case, like let's say the iCloud thing, if the password is really easy to break, where does the fault lie? Well, it technically is still the fault of the company, but you have to take your own action to make sure that you protect yourself in whatever ways possible. So I think that piece is important for media literacy, is to understand the difference between using the settings and having someone else break into, legally or in an unethical way. So anyways, I thought that was important.
Ted, do you have a Facebook account?
Yes, I do.
What kind of password do you use? And I'm not asking you your password, I'm just asking how sophisticated or complicated it might be.
It's a combination of both numbers, letters, both uppercase and lowercase, and the symbol.
Okay. Are there any services that you do not use because of your recent awareness in your courses?
Well, I have a Facebook account, but I do not use Facebook on my mobile device. When I visit Facebook, I use a web browser online on my mobile device because I know that when I install that app, I am giving all of that information away. And I know, excuse me, one of the points that we talked about last year in my first year course was that those that say they do not have Facebook do in fact have Facebook, because when I log in and I have you as a contact in my phone, and let's say I have your phone number, address, and email in my contact book on my phone, Facebook now has that. So Facebook has your contact information even though you don't have a Facebook account. So I think there's certain things that these kinds of apps breach that they shouldn't be, or that at least they should give you the option to give these types of information away. Because there are uses for it, like discovering new contacts, but I mean, is that needed? And how is it really being used?
So does Facebook not ask my permission to access my contacts?
They tell you that they are going to be accessing it, but they do not give you options.
It's an automatic thing. Okay. And so
Stop that. Because when
sorry, are you on an iOS device?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, I was going to say,
So,
iOS
yeah,
can
okay.
actually prevent that from happening.
okay. So things are changing. Things are changing. Okay, Ted, further question here. You're in an airport or a Starbucks. Are you going to go online?
I will if or after I connect to a virtual private network.
A virtual private network.
Yeah, to ensure that my connection is encrypted end to end, so that if there are sniffers or hackers in the airport on that wireless connection, I know that everything that I do is encrypted and will be a very tough time for them to break.
And our most recent knowledge seems to suggest that there are those sniffers and that they are run by our government at the airports, not necessarily in coffee shops. Okay,
I have a question actually. How does one, like the average person, access a VPN? Or, because I think something that's, like there's the digital divide in terms of devices and knowledge, but it also sounds like there's also a digital divide in terms of who is able to know about how to protect themselves and who has access to protecting themselves. And I'm not at all accusing you. I just think it's an interesting thing. Like, I don't know if many people in the audience know how to do what you just said. Can you share a little bit? Is that accessible to the average person?
Yes, it is. There are multiple ways to go about it. For the more tech savvy, you can either host your own or purchase a virtual private server. And
can I get it from Khash?
yes. There you go. And host, let's say, a Linux operating system on the server and set up an open VPN connection so that no matter where you are in the world, assuming the network allows for that connection, you will be able to connect to that VPN. There are also, for the average user, and I didn't set up my own. I do use a paid VPN. Anybody can sign up for one. There are multiple businesses that offer it. I sign up with one that does not keep logs, so that if you can log a connection, right? You can log every request that a user makes, but this particular company does not, and that's one of their selling points for me because, you know, it's just a security thing, right? It's not like we have anything to hide. I just think that we should have the ability to hide the things that we do. So by them not keeping the logs, I know that I'm safe, and everything that I do, it's in my personal life. It's what I choose to do is up to me, right? So, I mean, that can go both ways. That can be used for good, that can be used for evil. So,
a VPN costs about $40 a year, and where they're being used extensively is by Netflix users, because by logging into Netflix through a VPN which masks where you are located, and they use servers in other countries, you can access the programming you can't otherwise access in Canada.
Which is one of the
apparently 30% of Canadian Netflix users use VPN, which it's a good thing that when they were in front of the CRTC a few weeks ago, they refused to hand over their customer, their client list to the CRTC.
Because people would have gotten in trouble?
Well, they didn't feel the government was secure with that information.
Right.
Neil, I just want to quickly say that I think the conversations that we're having this morning on the panel, now this afternoon, is actually very broad. So we spent some time talking about fraud, we talked about security, there's also privacy, and there's who's governed, who's not, where are the risks, and it's unfortunate that we're actually trying to cram this in the time that we are. Just want to sort of pick up from what Mark was saying earlier, that when we think of privacy, we've got regulatory bodies, and I've mentioned that a few times this morning, regulatory bodies that are required to be compliant. So when we look at a Facebook or a Google, we've got our legislation bodies, we've got our federal or provincial based bodies going after them and saying, okay, you've got to tighten up some of these loose ends because this is unacceptable. And while we can hold them accountable, they are nonetheless still collecting a lot of data, which is a secure aspect, which is then, so now they've got these massive databases and networks with all our information. How vulnerable is that? And we've seen, as I've shared, how susceptible we are to being breached or hacked. We've also seen that a lot of organizations very cunningly embed their clauses or their escape clauses in the masses and masses of literature or copy that nobody would ever read through. And I think one of the panelists here mentioned that they're probably in the middle or towards the end, but no one's going to really read through that. We just want to get to the service and enjoy it. I think perhaps what we should make or start doing is a better job of making these companies more accountable, of explicitly saying that these are the impacts, these are the changes, and these are your risks. And you can opt in or opt out. And we started seeing Facebook do that, but then they kind of, what I don't like about Facebook is that they'll make the change to one, and everything is open up again, and you have to go back and reset everything. It's annoying. But what we should do is make them more accountable. And I just want to connect the dots with Kathy here. Kathryn, sorry. The world of cyberspace is truly a wild, wild west, and I heard that reference this morning. But what we need to start doing is understanding the risks and being informed and aware, and made aware of how we're at stake or what the risks are, and then trying to filter that down from an educational perspective to how we can inform our youth and users as well. And if we can start at the education level of young people, hopefully that will start then farming a generation to be more aware and actually stop all of these risks and exposures that we're today openly available to.
I'm going to be even a little stronger than that, Mick, and I'm going to ask if I can do this. I think education is probably the only response. And I say that because from a regulatory point of view, it cannot be achieved. Because I could pass laws in Canada, I can pass laws certainly in Ontario, I can pass laws in Canada, but the kinds of things that we've been discussing here don't occur in Canada. And as Ron pointed out, most of my communications go through the United States and are subject to the Patriot Act. I use Google Mail, so everything that I do on Google Mail is gone through American servers. The moment it crosses the border, it's no longer Canadian and no longer within Canadian jurisdiction. One of the reasons I admire Mozilla is that Mozilla is trying to be an agent. You know, that they are set aside, for instance, from Chrome. Chrome is a browser and Firefox is a browser, but they don't work the same way. They don't work for the same ends and generate profits in the same way. And so that's why I find it an intriguing situation there. So that's why I'm going to suggest that education is really the only response. Because other than that, I have to have a one-on-one relationship with Facebook and with Google and with iTunes and right down the line. These are not Canadian companies. The Canadian government is not going to get behind it and make this happen. I think I have to do it as a consumer, as a customer. I have to say things like that. One of the things I would like to suggest, for instance, is that written into my agreement, and I'm a Bell customer, proud of it, you know, years and years of great service. I think my user agreement with Bell should include the fact that if there is ever a request for my information, I then be notified. I know they're going to hand it over. It's not a question of that I would say, no, you can't do that, and I won't sign a contract unless you agree not to hand it over. That's a given. However, I don't think it's unreasonable for them to send me an email and say, hello, Mr. Andersen, I just want to let you know that the Ministry of Health requested information about you, and of course we complied because we do that. But I think it'd be reasonable for me to know that. And I think if that kind of accountability, if those emails were going out at the rate of 1.2 million, which is the number of requests they got, if a 1.2 million emails were generated, and it can be done by a bot, it's not something that even is terribly expensive, I think a lot of Canadians would be a lot more aware of the kinds of things that were going on. And I'm suggesting that maybe the AML start a petition. And we could get some millions of people to sign it and say, okay, Bell Telephone, okay, Rogers, let's put that in your user agreement. And all you have to do is to show me the consideration. I could say, hey, Bea, somebody was asking me about you, right? That's something you and I might do, you know, on a personal level. And this could be an email saying, Bea, we got this request. And it's interesting because the ministries can be quite far-ranging. For me to say the Ministry of Health is not a reach. You know, it's not the Ministry of Corrections or the Ministry of Transport. It's the Ministry of Health in some cases. It's the Ministry of Agriculture in some cases, if you've been reading about this, that are making these requests. And I just think it would be nice if we were given that. But I really believe, the more I'm listening and thinking here, is that this cannot be a Canadian solution because of the internationality of the actions.
Can I be devil's advocate? Well, you know what? It's not that I disagree either. I think I'm going to try to assimilate a lot of what's been said. Some great points on from both Mick and Neil. So, for a person who respects privacy and wants to do what you're talking about, which it sounds like is, we always push for opt-in versus opt-out. So only sign me up once I say yes, not by default sign me up and then I have to unsubscribe. Why does that happen already? Why do all these marketing companies sign you up by default? Why do insurance companies? Why does it happen? I mean, maybe I could put that out there, but I mean, clearly there's value that they get, and they don't practice a principle which we try to also educate about and espouse, which is data minimization. So let's collect everything, or as much as possible. Even if we don't know what we're going to use it for now, we'll find out something later, or maybe we can, using big data and other things, we can piece together some information. But it's better that we, the organization, have that information, whether it be Bell some other organization than it is to like ask everybody and hope that they'll sign up to volunteer, because it's much easier for me to say, no, actually I don't want you to have that information. And now they're crippled instead of us, instead of the end user. So I agree with you 100%. I think more companies should practice the principles of opt-in and of data minimization. But how do we motivate them? How do they see the benefit in that? In limiting their customer information, because that's money for a marketer. That's those data points give me more opportunities and more avenues to market to you. So maybe I'll put that out there.
Okay. I'm going to start wandering. I think it's that time of the panel.
Sorry, can I just respond to that question as you make your way over to the crowd? So the simple response to that is, so why do companies go ahead and opt people in? It's simple business. It's the fastest way of acquiring a customer. When you go out to a market-base and say, well, do you want to opt in? You lessen your acquisition rate. So it's all business. It's all marketing and way of reaching that target. But we started seeing some of that happen already through CASL. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of CASL, Canadian Anti-Spam Legislation. From a business perspective, it's a pain in the neck. From a privacy, it actually has a lot of value. But then there's a tug of war of sorts with CASL and these legislation laws coming in. It works and it doesn't work. It works and it doesn't work. It works because we can hold those who are compliant responsible. But the whole point of CASL was to stop spam. Spam's never going to stop. And that becomes a technical issue, not a legal issue. So I just want to respond to Mark's question. I think we've got some questions on the floor.
Yeah, I actually do have a question, because it sort of speaks to what Mark was talking about and you're talking about zoning. And that is the environment that we're in when we're online is inherently different from the environment that we're in, even though they're both public spaces, offline. And so my question is, somehow we've accepted things in that online environment that we would not tolerate in an offline environment. And I'm going to use some substitution here, Neil, for you. But if I go into a mall, for example, I consent to certain things. I consent to rules in that environment and to behaving in particular ways in that environment. But my rights are still important as well. I don't consent to someone rifling through my pockets as I walk through the mall and finding all of the things that I may or may not have in there. And then I don't get told afterwards that, well, security wasn't closed tight enough and it wasn't, And so I'm wondering, why is it that was okay? That online, it is just, again, a default, that kind of massive amounts of information are able to be collected. Just because you're consenting to use a service or go into, you open that app or have that app on your phone, shouldn't mean that the company has the right to then grab your contacts and everything else on the phone. And the fact that we've allowed that to happen without questioning it is almost what concerns me the most. So.
A quick response, and also the youth in our workshop have touched on this a little bit, is convenience and free. And then that idea of, well, nothing really is free. What are you paying for? What's the cost here? Facebook is free. A lot of apps and other tools that we use in our daily life are free, but the cost is sharing our information, consenting to things that we normally wouldn't consent to. Myself included too, right? I like convenience. I like having my phone with me, but I probably know a little bit more than the average person of what I'm consenting to. I'm still not happy about it and clearly looking for solutions about what to do about that. But yeah, convenience and free are two things.
But the thing you just said, between the lines, was awareness.
Yes.
Right? You need that increased awareness. This
right.
is also what Mark is talking about. And I think Mick is very concerned about this too. We have to raise people's awareness because the vulnerabilities are there, we just don't know they're there. Now, Ted knows they're there, and he's given us some things he does, right? Why does he do that? It's the awareness he's got that.
And actually, just a quick plug for Firefox, which I actually was using before I was at Mozilla, is that Firefox has 18% of market share of the browser market, which does not sound like that much, but when you have 1 billion people using browsers and online, that's a lot of people. And it kind of speaks to what you were saying before, Neil, about a petition or people who have these interests and want these things to change. Is Mozilla, we really see our browser, our Firefox users as a union of users. And one of the things that we've seen really our organization kind of move towards is that our users really are concerned about privacy, whether that's like at a very technical level or just as I want to make sure my information is being shared in an okay way. And so Mozilla is starting to move towards advocating a little bit more, actually a lot more, based on users' privacy and security issues. And so things with adding the do not track optional add-on in the browser, which signals to sites that you go on that you don't want to be tracked. Not all of them listen to it, but some of them do. And even just in the way that we do as a browser, gather people's information in a very opt-in kind of way. So those are also nonprofit, so we're doing this, we're not governed by shareholders, so we're doing this based on what our users are telling us are important to us and advocating in a policy way.
Can I supplement what you're saying too? Because I think, well, first of all, 100% awareness is like I agree. I think that's really what we end up talking about, which is, do you even know you're being tracked, first of all, so that you can know to opt in or not, or opt out. And then it's encouraging to hear people who are concerned about privacy, because I think there's a lot of dialogue, and that could be another whole panel on whether privacy, people will tend to say privacy is dead, or why do you care? And I think the more and more we see privacy being infringed upon, the more people are kind of willing to push back. And a good case in point about the mall you mentioned, we've been exploring a new technology with, it's more prominent in the States, mobile location analytics. And so you can have your phone on you and walk through Yorkdale Mall, and maybe some company will just be sort of scanning, and they'll be able to pick up that you walked in, spent 2 minutes, walked out. So they don't have to, I know it's funny, the analogy you gave, like going into your pocket, they're essentially doing that in many ways now as well. So,
and the reality is that physical property is now becoming less of a currency to people who actually want to exploit it. It's digital, right? So just very quickly picking up from what Mark said, I think you read my mind, but you may have heard of the new technology coming out in various markets through Apple called iBeacon. It's a reader that sits in a store, it connects to your device, it's able to specifically identify where in the store you go to, what you're looking at, how long you spent there, so they can use that for further marketing ability. And to answer your question directly, I think the response could possibly be that we get lost in the sexy factor of what these new technologies offer, right? So I've got a device, it can do this, it can do that, and I want to do it because I don't want to be left behind. So we just subscribe to it, and we trust that our information is being used in the way that we think that it's going to be used. And it comes back to education, it comes back to awareness, it comes to knowing how exposed you are.
And I know you sort of throwing the responsibility on the regulators, which is good, and it is. And in that sense, we are actually doing things, and there's other organizations, independent and otherwise, like government oversight bodies as well, that are looking into ways to protect that and have a win-win scenario. So you can, maybe you find out that someone walked into the Gap and spent 2 minutes, but not specifically Neil Andersen. So anonymizing that information so that you can provide benefit to the retailer while still not infringing upon or having danger. So just to be fair to the, just to show that I'm balanced.